Sometimes it isn't what the person said, it's the tone, the timing, the context. It's the buildup of irritations you've been swallowing for weeks, until one sharp sentence seems to trigger something bigger. Your body reacts before your mind can make sense of it. Your chest tightens, your face gets hot, anger rises, and within seconds, you've already responded. A louder tone, a bit of sarcasm, a cutting remark. Then comes the uncomfortable quiet, the regret, or worse, the frustration of not knowing whether you should have said more or whether you should have stayed silent. There's a subtle but common trap here, confusing reaction with strength and silence with weakness. A lot of people believe that if they don't hit back, they'll be seen as submissive, that the only way to protect dignity is to return the same coin. But dignity doesn't live in the volume of your response. It lives in the intention behind it. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by accusations, political pressure, and intrigue, learned not to react just to defend himself. Not because it didn't hurt, but because he knew that reacting to prove something to someone else is the fastest way to lose your own center. The deepest attacks are often not shouted. They're subtle, wrapped in irony or contempt. And what hurts most isn't the attack itself, but the doubt it plants. Am I weak? Am I being naive? And in that inner turbulence, we forget what matters. Clarity doesn't come from reactivity, it comes from conscious self-command. Epictetus taught that no one injures you without your interpretive participation. In other words, the blow only lands when you validate it inside yourself. You've probably felt this: an empty criticism, a sideways comment, a provocation disguised as just a joke. Everything in you demands a response, and at the same time, something deeper asks for a pause, because it isn't really about them, it's about you, about the kind of life you want to hold steady, even in the middle of chaos. This video is born from that point, the thin line between striking back on impulse and responding with discernment, not as someone who avoids conflict, but as someone who decides which battles deserve their energy. Mastering your response is not the absence of emotion, it's emotional maturity. It's understanding you can feel it all, the discomfort, the anger, the sadness, without being dragged by any of it. Marcus Aurelius wasn't a cold man, he was a trained man, someone who, even under attack, knew how to separate noise from truth. And above all, he knew that the greatest strength isn't winning the argument, it's leaving it intact. Because what fractures a person most isn't what is said to them, it's what they choose to carry after they hear it. The goal here isn't to teach you to ignore things, and it isn't to encourage passive silence. What we're aiming for is more subtle, replacing automatic impulse with a response born from choice, an interval between what comes from outside and what you decide to do with it, a second of awareness, an inner space that might feel small but changes everything. Because in that second, you stop being a hostage and you return to being the owner of yourself. There's a single second that changes everything, the second between what was said and what you're about to do with it. Most people don't even notice that interval. They react without thinking, as if responding quickly were proof of strength. But real strength is recognizing that this second is a choice, and that in the quiet between stimulus and response, real control lives. When someone attacks you, even subtly, your body reacts before your mind can interpret it. Your voice rises, your heart speeds up, your thoughts tangle. That happens because your nervous system reads the attack as a threat, and before any rational analysis begins, it prepares you to defend yourself. But reacting in that state is like driving with a fogged windshield. You can move, but you can't see clearly where you're going. Marcus Aurelius understood this. That's why he trained the habit of pause, a small gesture with huge power. Instead of answering in the heat of emotion, he would breathe, stay quiet, and sometimes choose not to answer at all. Not out of avoidance, but out of discernment. He knew that any response born from urgency carries more of the other person than of himself. You've lived this. At work, for example, someone criticizes you unfairly. The immediate impulse is to snap back, defend yourself, prove you're right. But if you respond in the same tone, you feed the confrontation. If you pause, observe, and delay your reply, something different happens. The attack loses momentum. It finds no mirror, no automatic reflection. And without that reflection, it doesn't. That small act, breathing, staying quiet, delaying, isn't passivity. It's a form of power, It gives you clarity back. It lets you choose your words. It lets you decide whether it's even worth responding. And often you'll realize that not everything deserves an answer, because not every attack is an invitation to war. Some are simply noise that collapses when it isn't reinforced. As you apply this principle, the first consequence shows up quickly. You burn less energy. You don't step into every provocation. You choose when and how to invest your attention. And the space that used to be filled with reactivity becomes a center, a quiet point of stability, but unmistakably strong. A lot of conflicts don't start with content. They start with tone. A neutral sentence delivered with aggression triggers alarms inside you, and if you're not careful, you respond to the tone and stop listening to what was actually said. That's how discussions become emotional duels, where nobody speaks from clarity, they speak from intensity, trying to win by force of feeling. This is the silent pattern, emotion arguing with emotion. A dry remark gets a sharp response. The sharp response invites another attack, and suddenly you're trapped in a cycle of noise with no room for listening. The content disappears, and everything becomes about how it was said, not what actually matters. Epictetus gives a precise reminder here. An insult only reaches you if you accept the judgment embedded in it. In other words, what wounds you isn't the sentence itself, it's what you believe about the sentence. If someone calls you incompetent, the pain only exists if, inside you, there's doubt about your competence. Without that doubt, the words lose their grip. That's why separating content from tone is such an essential filter. When someone speaks aggressively, pause. Before you respond to the harshness, ask yourself, is there anything useful here? Is there an actual critique? Or is it just emotional noise? Sometimes what looks like an attack is simply a request delivered badly. Sometimes it isn't even that. It's just projection, something that doesn't deserve to be carried. You've seen this happen. A provocation that, once you step back, turns out to be hollow. A disguised attack with no real point behind it. When you engage, you waste energy proving the obvious. When you filter, you preserve your strength. Not because you deny what you feel, but because you prioritize what matters. Over time, this practice changes the atmosphere around you. Interactions become cleaner. You listen more than you react. You respond with more precision than intensity. And gradually you realize, controlling other people's tone is impossible, but choosing your attention, choosing what you take in, that is real mastery. There's a common myth about self-control, that staying silent is always the best response. But silence born from fear isn't wisdom, it's repression. And the cost of staying quiet to avoid conflict can be far too high, because contained anger becomes tension, and tension stored long enough becomes distance, bitterness, or a later explosion. Self-control isn't swallowing everything, it's speaking with clarity, at the right time, with the right intention. Marcus Aurelius understood this. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, he was precise. His responses didn't come from raw emotion, they came from steadiness, from an inner place that didn't need to justify itself, only to state what was true. In many situations, a short, firm sentence is enough. A simple, "that doesn't seem fair to me," can stop a provocation. "I'm not going to discuss this in that tone," can completely change the direction of a conversation. Not because it intimidates, but because it sets a boundary. And where a boundary is clear, respect has something to work with. Staying silent out of fear of conflict isn't calm, it's self-abandonment. But responding with firmness, without anger, is presence. It comes from someone who knows they deserve respect and communicates that, not as a threat, but as a position, without raising your voice, without over-explaining, simply defining where the other person ends and where you begin. Practiced over time, this changes the quality of your relationships. You become someone who doesn't accept everything, but also doesn't attack. Someone who listens, weighs, and when deciding to speak, speaks with intention. And in practice, that reduces future attacks, because respect grows where discernment exists. And where discernment exists, disrespect meets limits. Most people react, few people choose to respond. The difference is the space between stimulus and action, the space Marcus Aurelius cultivated daily. He knew that in chaos, real firmness doesn't live in shouting. It lives in the quiet clarity of someone who has decided not to lose himself, sustain itself. Epictetus reminds us that freedom begins where reactivity ends. The world will keep provoking, judging, trying to shake you, but when you train your mind, you can leave those encounters with something bigger, mastery, not over others, but over yourself. Attacks don't require emotional defense. They require discernment. When you answer what matters and let the noise fall away, you govern your energy. And that quiet governance is what allows you to move through life with less exhaustion and more presence. The real victory at the end of conflict isn't winning the argument, it's staying whole. It's looking at yourself afterward and realizing you didn't lose yourself in reaction. You didn't say what didn't need to be said. You didn't absorb what didn't deserve space. You kept your center. Because the person who governs himself doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. His steadiness doesn't depend on someone else's tone. His calm doesn't depend on external silence. And his value isn't in a quick reply, it's in the right reply. A reply that always comes from choice, from dignity, from center.